मा विद्विषावहै। ओम शांति शांति शांति। How many of you are the coordinators, lead coordinators for the study groups? Okay. And I think Swamiji is ready now. I think what we can, Swamiji, what is going to probably do, as the email says, is that he's going to go through what is the need for a study group, what is a satsang, how does study group give you that satsang, what is that meaning for a satsang. And so without much ado, Swamiji here.
So early in the morning I had a technical glitch. The system was not booting up. I'm glad to see on a Saturday early morning, on a cold Saturday early morning, that there are at least 25 of you here, which is a very hearty thing to note. To start off, as I go through every session, I come across at least a handful of people every week who come and tell me that the study group is not what they intend for. They would like me to continue with the 1 hour sessions. And equally, I have another handful of people who come out of the study group with such a beaming face and say, this is the best program that I've ever come across in Chinmay Mission. So there is a vast majority, at least 50% that I could see, who believe that there was one person who commented which just captures their feeling. He said, Andhe neva niyamana yathandaha dhandramyamanaha pariyanti mudhaha. This is a quotation from Kathopanishad, which very succinctly put, it means blind leading the blind. So in a study group, if there is somebody who is facilitating who is as good as us or as bad as us, then we will only be going in circles and not achieving anything. Fair enough. So we have been meaning to start this particular training for the facilitators, so that it's not just for the facilitators, it was welcome for anybody from any session to join to understand what the study group means. So their belief is fair enough. So we have thought that, maybe in December or January we thought we will have it. Then it got postponed, and then we had another storm, again got postponed, and finally the third time, the best time, we have got it started. Let us first start with the history of this study group. Where did it all start? It was in the year 1950 that Pujya Gurudev started his mammoth task of taking Hinduism to fellow Hindus so that they can live the Sanatana Dharma way of life. His Guruji, Swami Tapon Maharaj, he had said, you are a sannyasi. Why get into all this kind of jhanjat and jhamela? Why get back into samsara? But his conviction was that if I, who have been a graduate from this system, he had graduated as a a journalist. He had graduated as a law school student, and he had no clue as to what beauty lies in the scriptures. Until unless he stumbled upon Swami Shivananda Maharaj of Divine Life Society, and that too there was an investigative mind there. He wanted to investigate as to why this so-called Shivananda Maharaj has left his thriving business of being a doctor in those days when he used to earn in thousands of rupees, that he just left it and joined and started something here. There was something spooky happening here. But then he was convinced with the openness and warmth that Swami Shivanandaji had shown every nook and corner, every aspect of the ashram and its running, that he was more than convinced that when he was for the first time asked, he went for 3 days, he got stuck there for 3 months. So when he first asked him to speak on a topic called Shreyas and Preyas, which is the very starting topic of Kathopanishad. So he did a good research on it and came back to present the topic of Shreyas and Preyas. And he himself was so awestruck with the topic and the depth that it provided that he wanted to pursue it further. So he said the best person to teach you on a one-on-one basis would be Swami Tapovan Maharaj. So he forwarded his file to Swami Tapovan Maharaj. He walked all the way to Swami Tapovan Maharaj from Haridwar all the way to Uttarkashi through the Tehri Dam area. So he went there walking. And Tapovan Maharaj, as disciplinarian as he was, he said, what is the proof that you are Swami Chin, or you are what you call yourself to be? Do you have a letter of recommendation from Shivanandaji? He said, no, go get it. He walked all the way back. This is called pariksha. If the student is really interested, he would do what it takes to be a student. And that is a beautiful definition of Sishya. Shasanat Sishyate Anena Yaha Saha. The one who is willing and ready to be disciplined is the one who is called Sishya. Most of us love to be only devotees, hang around, but not get benefited. But to be a disciple, it takes a different depth of a personality. So he walked back, and in his description he says that there was hardly road, there were only these pebbles and stones, and his foot was lacerating by the time he came back. But still he came back with the letter, and Swami Tapovan Maharaj, who never entertained any Sishya around him, for the first time he accepted a student. And his system was very unique. There was no classroom structure. There was, whenever he said, come on, let's start talking on this, that would be a class. Whether he is sitting on the banks of Gangaji, or walking on the Himalayas, or just preparing for some tea or coffee, he would be giving the message. And I am told, it's recorded in the history, that the first book that Swami Tapovan Maharaj started speaking, and his language of conversation was in Sanskrit. Both were Malayalis. Swami Tapovan Maharaj was from Palagat, and Gurudev was from Ernakulam. Both were Malayalis, but he refused to speak in Malayalam. He said this is something to be learned in Sanskrit and be prepared to learn in Sanskrit. So, because of staying in Shivanandaji's ashram, he had picked up enough Sanskrit to follow Swami Tapovan Maharaj. And his next discipline was that whatever has been spoken, whenever asked for, Gurudev should be able to reproduce verbatim as was said by Swami Tapovan Maharaj. There were no dictaphones, there were no recorders, there were no paper and pen even. It was all up here. And there were no PowerPoints either. So as they would be walking along, and we would be talking on Panchadashi, Vedanta Panchadashi, which is supposed to be the most difficult subjects. That was the first topic that he had taken. And then we went directly into Upanishads. So they went through this disciplining system. There was at a point that every student has a breaking point, and that came in Gurudev's life too. One day, Swami, he said, why these scriptures? Can't you just give me that knowledge? So he said, okay, go fetch me some water from Gangaji. So Gurudev ran down, got a glass full of water. It's almost like a furlong down, those of us who have gone there. So from there he fetched, he said, he threw the glass down. He said, I asked you to get water. He was like, enough. How else do you think that I should bring water without a glass? So Tapan Maharaj looked at him, smiled and said, how else do you think that I can bring that knowledge without the scriptures? Scriptures is the vessel through which that knowledge can be delivered to you. It is a time-tested process. So there were times wherein Gurudev had lost it with Tapan Maharaj, and there was a message in there. So thus, having learned from him, moved down, he walked all the way from Uttarkashi down to Hyderabad, and from there he was guided to Pune. In Pune, there is this temple even today, which was run by Harihara Seva Samaj. And in that Seva Samaj temple, which was Rastapet Ganesh temple. So he had a Shubharambha in a Ganesh temple. On the first day there was a huge crowd of 5 people, including the speaker and the pujari. By the third day, they had to move out of the temple complex. There was the Indian temple system, there was a main deity and there are other deities. So they had to move out of the temple complex because the crowd that was thronging in was amazing. There were at least a few hundreds of people, and thus started the Chinmaya movement. The Chinmaya mission officially was registered in Chennai in 1951 under the name of Chinmaya mission. There, in 1952, some of the ardent disciples of Gurudev asked him that when you come and deliver your lectures, in earlier days he used to deliver lectures for 41 days. And there is a sample of those 41 days in our website, his Kathopanishad. If you listen to the flow, it's amazing. It's a 1.5 hour non-stop, no pause, no nonsense, direct message. Even to follow that English, you need to have a dictionary on your side, keep marking the words that you didn't understand. And by the time you mark this, you have already 4 sentences gone by. So he used to deliver lectures for 41 days. And we said, after this there is like a vacuum. Why don't we start something so that we have the continuity? So Gurudev thought for a while and he said, maybe we should start something called a group wherein you study this material. And that is how the word that was coined, study group. As the years passed, the method that got developed was in 2 different patterns. One pattern which is ideal for running a study group effectively is a group which is below 10 members of participants. So each one of them prepares, say if they are doing Sadhana Panchakam, it has 40 steps. So they prepare with 2 steps each, come for the class for 1.5 hours, and then each one gets an opportunity to explain those two steps of Sadhana Panchakam and then move to the next one. And once everybody has presented, then they have a discussion as to why each one thought what their thinking was in the right course. And they had to substantiate with experience and lot of logic. This was one method. The second method, as the group started, expanding, so maybe a group of 20, in 1.5 hours you cannot have everybody get the opportunity to go around giving their meanings and logic. So the next method that got developed was they formed a roster in which they had every two participants take the lead role of that particular study group, and the assigned syllabus for that particular day was prepared by these two people, and they will be the two people who would be not delivering a discourse but expanding on the thought. As these two people would expand on that thought, as one person would expand it and stop, the rest of them in the group, if they find something which is not logical, which is not applicable, which is not understood, they could immediately ask questions. And these people who prepare should prepare with such thoroughness that they should be ready to answer and substantiate the logic that they are proposing. This method is quite effective, and it has sustained various Chinmaya Mission centers without an acharya for a long time, including when we were in Yuva Kendra. When I was in Yuva Kendra, we did not have an acharya, we did not have anybody who had learnt. So a group of 15 of us went to Gurudev and said, if you could tell somebody, some of these senior mission members to come down to our place and conduct our study group. So he looked at us, and there were a couple of copies of Self-Unfoldment with him. So he picked one copy and he pulled me out of the crowd, and he gave the book and said, you lead the group. I said, but how? I said, you prepare, you read, and assign each person a topic to prepare, and when they come back, let them speak, and you facilitate in such a way that this whole subject does not go tangential. And when that was put in my hand, I was totally flabbergasted. I didn't know how to handle it. But then after a year, his memory was amazing. After a year, when he saw me again in one of the camps, he said, did you get the question as to whether karma is first or vasana is first? I said, yes. What did you answer? So I said, for this karma the vasana is first, for that vasana the karma is first. So he laughed. He did not answer it, but he just laughed. He said, you will know. That is not the right answer, but you will know. So you would remember to ask as to how far we have gone and what we have covered and how the progress is happening. In a short time of 1.5 to 2 years, we observed an amazing change. That group of us youngsters who would go all over the place started streamlining our thought process, orienting ourselves to the subject matter alone. It took a while for the entire group to settle in, but it took almost 1.5 years for us to settle in for a weekly study group course. And after 1.5 years, the change was so substantial that we had to break that group into two, because we were having 25 of us. So there was a senior chick group and a junior chick group. So one of the senior chick group members would facilitate the junior chick group, and I was facilitating the senior chick group. So this is something which really benefits every individual who is participating in it. But there are a lot of apprehensions right in the beginning. Some of the apprehensions, there is definitely in every crowd one or two who are challenging. Challenging because everything that is proposed is challenged by them, is not accepted by them, which is okay, which is fine, which is a good problem to have. But the bad problem to have is when the facilitator takes over, and instead of it becoming a study group, it becomes a lecture series by the facilitator. But the facilitator keeps speaking, going on and on and on, and there is no scope for others to express. And that is why we have this facilitators training, wherein we would understand how to handle study group. So in the next 1.5 hours, we will see what are the benefits of study group, and then the last part would be, the second part would be to understand as to how to conduct a study group effectively. So the first benefit of a study group is each one of us has a capacity to think. Each one of us thinks that we think effectively. No one for themselves ever says, even out of conversational humility. There is humility and there is conversational humility. And what is conversational humility? Knowing very well that you are not humble, you claim that you are humble. That is conversational humility. We say or we accept that I am not that intelligent. When hearts of hearts you say that I know I am intelligent. This is just to get through this process. Nobody from inside ever believes that we are dumb. Even the most dumbest never think that they are dumb. We would like to claim that we are intelligent. For whatever it is worth, everybody who thinks that their process of thinking is the most effective way of thinking. And this is the biggest hurdle that in a study group that we should grow out of. So there are two groups of mindsets. One group of mindset, I call it as the growth mindset. The other group of mindset, I call it as the closed mindset. The closed mindset is the mindset wherein we come with a fixed notion, preconceived perception, and whatever I perceive is the ultimate reality. And that kind of mindset leads to what is technically called as jalpa. There are some people who name themselves as jalpa, but is that your... What jalpa means? Pointless, headless argument, leading nowhere. That is what jalpa means, technically. Like in my native language, there is a saying that a rabbit has 3 legs. Now everybody knows that a rabbit has 4 legs. Now this person is so convinced and vehement to prove that the rabbit has 3 legs. And finally when nothing works, you come and show them a rabbit saying that the rabbit has 4 legs. They won't give in. They will say, my rabbit which I saw had only 3 legs. Hence therefore only 3 legs. They still would not agree. So that is called jalpa. The second one is called vada. Now vada is an argument. Now vada has a standpoint to prove others wrong. Whatever you propose, there would be these kind of set of people who would love to prove others wrong. Now this vada has to transform into an open mindset, and that kind of communication is called samvada. If you observe Bhagavad Gita, every chapter at the end there is a sankalpa vakya which is called Om Tat Sat Srimad Bhagavad Gita Su Upanishatsu Brahma Vidyayam Yoga Shastre Shri Krishnarjuna Samvade. It is not called vada, it is called samvada. Samvada Sushtu Samyak Vada. That kind of argument wherein you are not trying to challenge to prove the other person's viewpoint as wrong or the opinion as wrong, but you challenge it in order to understand, learn and grow. You leave that space open, the space to understand, and you are not vehement on your standpoint that it should be right. So that open mindset is what we require to acquire in a study group, which a facilitator should aim for. Hey, don't just go on arguing. Like I remember in the first and second session, there were a couple of them, and everything that I would propose, they would have questions, they would argue. And there was this person who was arguing to the point of ridiculousness. So I just pulled up my sleeves and I said, hey, look, if you want to argue for the sake of argument, because you are in love with your questions, not in love with the answers, I can take it headlong. Better if you stop it here. And you will argue on that point. And that is called jalpa. But then for samvada, is wherein you have asked a question, but the asking process is when I understood the difference between two words, doubt and a question. In India, they are synonymous. I never understood the difference. So if in a class they would stop and say, if you have any doubts, please ask. So they would ask questions and I would answer it, and then it was done. I was at the Southern Methodist University here. And after my lecture, I said, so in the initial days, 2003, 2004, if you have any doubts. So they all got up. I said, I don't have doubts, but I have questions. That left me thinking as to what is the difference. I came back, searched, went through different dictionaries, and I think it was the Merriam-Webster that gave me good clarity. Doubt is often based out of lack of shraddha. Question is, when there is shraddha, there is belief that what you are saying is logical, but there is something which I don't understand or grasp that logic. So I have only a question, you have to clarify it. Doubt, I don't even buy into the logic, hence therefore there is a doubt. So open mindset is when you have a question, a query to investigate and not a doubt to completely negate and delete the logic. And why should there be a mindset of questioning and investigating and not doubt? Everybody goes through this process of transition. They have to go from jalpa to having a vada, then grow to samvada. Jalpa is meaningless. Vada, there is a wrong standpoint. It has to change. Samvada is when you have evolved from that vada mindset into trying to learn, understand and grow. So that is the whole process of growth. That is the first benefit out of the study groups. That there is a slow evolving process from jalpa to samvada. In some of the usages in Sanskrit, there is something called vitandavada, that is also called jalpa. In other words, that vitandavada is also called jalpa, that they won't go with the logic. Now why should somebody go with the logic of scriptures? There is in mountaineering, there is a very beautiful saying. It says, at least when you are walking on snow, walk in the footsteps of your leader. Because knowing our mindset, knowing our psychology, we would walk our own path. When I say in mountaineering, at least while walking on snow, walk in the footsteps of your leader. Because they would have tested that path, and it is the least probability to make mistakes. And those of us living in Dallas, we know walking on sleet or ice sometimes can be very rude. That I found our board member, he went to pick his newspaper early in the morning, UK Gupta, and he slipped. And while slipping, he tried to catch on to that post box, and that also got off. And he fell and he crushed his entire left hand. And thank goodness it was just his hand. There were people when I visited him in the hospital who had head injuries, hip injuries, dislocations. So when you're walking on snow, the leader has already tested the route. He has already checked that this is the safest. And on snow, the tested path is the best path. Similarly, in path of spirituality, there is nobody curtailing, saying that you should not find your own path. Yes, it will lead you with your own experience, but it will be as painful, as time consuming, that we don't have time at our luxury. But in this time tested path in scriptures, all these rishis have tested every path out. And finally come to the crux of it, which is called Vedanta. Why is it called Vedanta? In the Samhitas, should I go through the entire logic of it again? I think in every session I have already spoken as to how our scriptures are laid out. So there are 4, Rig Veda, Yajurveda, Samaveda and Atharva Veda. Each Veda has got several segments, themes. Each theme is called a Samhita. In each Samhita there are 4 parts. It is called the Mantra, Brahmana, Aranyaka and the Upanishad. That last part of each Samhita is called Vedanta, end of that particular theme, that subject, that thought flow. That is called Upanishads. So Upanishads are the knowledge, the crux of all these rishis that has been laid out. And it is time tested. So these scriptures, though we start with our own doubts, we have to evolve in trying to understand that the scriptures wherein they claim themselves that after reaching to a certain point, yatra vedaha avedaha bhavanti, that there is no need for scriptures after a certain extent. Once you have the experience, even the scriptures stand invalidated. Or to put it in a different term, that person stands as a proof for the Vedas that so far the process has been on the right track. But they don't need to refer to the Vedas refer to them as the guidance or the guiding force. So hence, when we look at the scriptures in our study group, we should have that open mindset to follow along and try to imbibe, learn and remove our doubts through investigative, that is called Viveka. Viveka is to understand and catch the logic through the entire scriptural volumes that we have. Now the second benefit of the scriptures is, when we sit at a meeting, how many times has the meeting not gone off into some tangential topics? We have an agenda. That is the purpose of having an agenda, so that you don't go off the track. But how many times has it not been hijacked? Even when I am giving lectures on an open platform for discussion and having question answers, I get some weird questions. Nothing related to the topic. Suddenly I stopped on one topic in Vivek Chudamani in first session. I said, do you have any questions? There goes one hand. And this person asks, what is your stance on Musharraf and his policies on India? I quickly looked into Vivek Chudamani. Did I miss it somewhere? Did Adi Shankara mention it somewhere that there is Musharraf and Indian policy as to how he is following? Totally out of the context. And there are some questions which are totally with that topic, but not necessary. It is just a fluff around, not the stuff inside. Like I was talking on Mahabharata, and this person suddenly raises his hands. He says, "Can you tell me the 99th Kaurava's name?" I can go refer and tell you, but is it necessary at this moment, at this point of our discussion, that you have to know that 99th Kaurava? Oh, it's just a name. You should know the name. I said, Uddhav Chaitanya. Be happy with it. Uddhav Chaitanya. He said all Kaurava starts with Du, like Dushasana, Duryodhana. How can it be Uddhava? I said, no, there was Vikarna also. He was not called Duvikarna. So when I asked him, if you know the first 98 names, then I'll give you the 99th name. No, I was just interested only in the 99th one. It was with reference to the topic, but it was not some question which was really required at that point. So what happens in a group is that each one of us, we have never had the habit of training our mind to consistently think about one particular topic in a given direction. We have anekagrata in our mind. It has to be brought down to ekagrata. That is the second benefit of study groups. That our minds are anekagra. At this point, given a point, if you have to write down where all your mind has gone in the past 5 minutes, you will be surprised where your mind has gone. And in a discussion, as I said, everybody thinks that they are the most intelligent one, and their unstreamed, unchannelized, undisciplined thought pattern of anekagrata is the right process. That has to be disciplined. That we stay focused on the topic. Even if we take examples from our own personal lives to illustrate that particular point of logic, it has not to be something that is of a personal sobbing story. It has to be something to do with that particular topic, and take that one simple example to illustrate it and move forward. Not make a discussion out of that particular event in life. It is not a group therapy session. It is not a AA group. You know the AA group? Anonymous? So it is not an AA group that we are having here, that you tell your personal sob stories and then that is a study group. No, it is not that. You have to focus on the topic, on the subject. And minds are untrained. We have never been taught how to train our minds. We have been stuffed with lots of data. I won't even call it education. We have been stuffed with a lot of data. And sometimes we are clueless at the end of the data that we have as to what to do with that data. But when it finally meets life, we have to make a living, and then we start scratching our heads as to what to do with this data. One of the surprises that I find is somebody who has done his B Pharmacy is in Verizon working, writing codes. B B Pharmacy and Coach, it has got nothing to do with it. And somebody who has done his masters in the IT industry is a medical representative. It has got nothing to do with it. So we have a lot of data, but when it comes to the point of making a living, we have not streamlined our thought enough, disciplined our thought enough to make use of the data available. Anekagrata is the deficiency that we have. And that can be streamlined through this study group. That when you take a topic, stay focused on that topic. So how should the topic be built? Whether you are speaking for 3 minutes, 5 minutes, 10 minutes, 20 minutes or an hour, doesn't matter. The format must be very clear. And that is well illustrated by Bhagavan Krishna in Bhagavad Gita. So beautifully, consistently shown. And he has a challenge in front of him. And he is Arjuna. A classic example of going tangent is the 8th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. The 7th chapter Bhagavan starts with Jnanam Vijnanam Pravakshami. I'll tell you Jnana and Vijnana. At the end of the 7th chapter, he mentions about the afterlife. As is a curious mind, if we want to know what happens after life, what happens? So Bhagavan patiently goes through that entire chapter of 8, through that whole process of Dakshinayana, Uttarayana, then the Surya Marga, Chandra Marga, as to how the soul will leave and what happens to that soul. What happens when they reach to the Swarga, they come back to the earth again. So he gives the entire process, and at the end of 8th chapter, he reconnects it to the Jnana Vijnana. That in 9th chapter when he starts, he again starts saying, that Jnana Vijnana which I started then, O Sukshmamate, O Arjuna with the subtle mindset, please listen carefully. Oh, I have to be subtle mindset. No, let me not get, out of focus. So his focus is again there. Comes back to the topic. So how does he take each topic? In the first introduction, he narrates what he is going to speak on. In 2-3 sentences, sum up what is it that you are going to present in that study group. On what you have presented, divide it into 5, 6, 7, as many subtopics. Like you said, Bhagavad Gita, the first sloka, Dharma Kshetre, Kurukshetre. So Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra. Today I am going to speak on Dharma Kshetra, Kurukshetra. The literal meaning is Dharma Kshetra, the righteous Kshetra, is between the peninsula of Ganga Yamuna Delta. That is where it's called the Dharma Bhumi. Below which it is called Karma Bhumi. Above that is called Yoga Bhumi. So in this Dharma Kshetra, there is Kurukshetra. Literally meaning there is a place called Kurukshetra. Then you go into the subtler details. That every walk of life has got its righteous boundaries to be worked within. And that is called our Kurukshetra. Kurukshetra, the field of activity. Kuru means activity. The field of activity has its boundaries of righteousness. When that boundaries were trespassed, it is in that condition that this Mahabharata Yuddha had to take place. And in this Dharma Yuddha, there were two sides. You can now start developing on the topic. So you have the topic, then you divide it into subtopic. Each subtopic has to be given, there has to be an explanation given, and then if possible an example given, and then connect it to the next topic. And when you connect it to the next topic, there is a flow. Otherwise there is a choppy, you're going all over the place, and it's a treadmill syndrome again. That you have been speaking and speaking pointlessly, not reaching anywhere. So streamlining a thought, streamlining or channelizing our thinking process is so effective that it has a practical implication in our day-to-day life. In any given moment of our life, no experience comes with a RSVP. It sends you a card up front, saying, hey, in next half an hour, I will be the experience who will be haunting you. No, it just comes by. And when it comes by, how do you respond to the situation and not react to the situation? A response can be given only when our mind is in a trained, disciplined pattern. That you look at the situation, you have a topic, you divide it into various fragments of what it includes and deal with each topic, come to a conclusion and find the connectivity in all that to have a comprehensive view of that situation. And this kind of methodical approach towards life comes through as a disciplined effect of the study group. So the first one was that we move from Jalpa to Vada to Samvada. The second one is that we channelize our Anekagrata into Ekagrata. Now the third discipline is, the third benefit of study group is, each one of these scriptures is so generic and applicable in our life. To find that application of it in our life consistently. And for this very reason, Adi Shankaracharya often mentions Vedo nityam adhiyatam taduditam karmasvanushthiyatam. In Sadhana Panchakam he starts, he says, Vedo nityam adhiyatam. Have the guidelines of scriptures in life. And in Bhagavad Gita also it says, Tasmat Shastram Pramanam Te Karya Karya Vyavasthitau. Like when you are working in the field of electricity, you have those stream of science called physics, which has a chapter on electricity. You follow that along to learn that topic, the basics of it and its application of it. As much as science has the practical aspect, the application aspect of it, applied science and the pure science. The pure science seems totally lost if there is no practical application of it. Similarly, the scriptures, the logic of scriptures, to understand it is one set of learning. To understand it in the perspective of its practical application is a second set of it. Learning as you learn it, trying to see, trying to contemplate as to how practically this can be applied in life. Rather, what do? We start off totally on a wrong note. We start off with the logic as to how this cannot be practically applied in life. How it is impractical. And let me tell you, the sages have not brought this entire scriptural knowledge out of their hat. They have done thorough investigation before they put in the word, and even the combination of words is so precise that when you read Adi Shankara's Shankara Bhashya, people who have gone through the Shankara Bhashya, they say that it is so precise that you could not have added another word or deleted another word from it. So precise, so comprehensive, that it has catered to all kinds of mindsets, and yet it is not layered with lots of fluffiness in it. Somebody was talking about their thesis, so they took their documentation to their professor. When he looked at that volume, went through that volume, and he said, this is like a 800 pounds of fluff. Can you boil it down to stuff? I have to search for stuff in between. When you read through the scriptures, there is no fluff around. There is no beating around the bush. Straight, simple truths given. Now, instead of looking at it from the standpoint of how it cannot be applied, our contemplation should start in trying to understand how it can be applied. And what are the blocks, stumbling blocks that we come across in its application? Yes, that can be answered. But if our standpoint of entire contemplation is to prove as to how it will not work, I am sure there are 1,001 ways to prove how it will not work. And we will be pretty strong as to prove why it will not work. So that Shraddha has to be inculcated. The fourth benefit. What is the third benefit? To understand its practical, applied, or if it will be just theory. The theory has to translate into its practical application. The fourth benefit is our minds as a personality, unless we are put to task, unless we are cornered with the task ourselves, we would not put effort to contemplate into the right direction. And how many times that we don't hear people saying that I work good under pressure. I am extremely productive under pressure. And what does that indicate? That unless it comes to that time wherein I really have to produce, that I don't streamline my entire energies and resources into that task. And that is what Gurudev had done to me. That when he thrust that book in my hand, he put that responsibility on my shoulders. I was thinking of some other shoulder which would come and help us. But when it was given unto me, now it became my responsibility to go through that entire process of self-unfoldment. And once that responsibility is taken, once I really feel responsible to the task given, that my mind really gets whipped into the right process of thinking. And in this study group process, they will hear in the lectures, why lectures seem to be very easy and fun. There is no effort from my side as a listener at all. As long as it is effortless, it is beautiful. There is no personal responsibility at stake. See, if I had to speak for 2.5 hours, I have to do a research of at least 30-40 hours. For 2.5 hours, I have to do a research of 30-40 hours. Then I have to streamline my thinking, jot down all the points as to what has to be covered, and prepare for it at least 4 hours. Then a rough draft is created. And that rough draft has to be finally, it has to come out with a crystal clear clarity. A final draft is created. And that final draft has to be so clear in my head that I don't need to carry loads of books and papers and other things. Once on a multi-religious platform which was conducted in SMU, I was invited. There were other professors and others who were on religious studies. They were with loads of books, carrying, and they were born Christians. They were born Jew, and they had to refer to their books, and they had to quote from there, and the whole podium was filled with books. So I was feeling a little awkward because I had no book. So I went there, spoke my 10 minutes, came back. So one professor came in and he said, I have been speaking on this particular religion, studying this particular religion for past 35 years. I have been a professor. But how is it that you never refer to a book? There's so much of preparation that has to go in, that it has to be crystal clear up here, that when you deliver it, you know what is the sequence of how it has to be delivered. When the responsibility is on your shoulders, you are pushed to the corner wherein you have left no room but to prepare. And that preparation is the helping aid which will transform our personality. Many people objected that freshly trained brahmacharis, you are throwing them into the crowd. How sure are you that they are qualified to teach? Wherein on one side the scriptures say that they have to be Shrotriya, Brahmavit. Shrotriya, somebody who has the scriptural knowledge and they have to have the personal experience. Without that, how are you just throwing them into the crowd? So he said, I have done one aspect of it. The other aspect lies on them. And one of the messages to the recently initiate brahmacharis, Gurudev said, take my name and you will get place to stay, food to eat and clothes to cover yourself. But if you have to earn respect, it lies in transforming the Shrotriyata into Brahmanishtata. And that is the effort that you have to put. And don't go into the crowd trying to transform the people. Use the platform as if you are speaking unto yourself, benefiting from that platform, which has given you an opportunity to speak, think in that streamlined order. First you benefit, the rest of it is a bonus if others benefit. True to that word, even today when I speak on a platform, I am first speaking to myself, addressing my own self, and then if somebody gets benefited. And that is why whenever I speak, it is not like, you all have to do this sadhana. No, that language doesn't come at all now. It is like, when I do this particular sadhana, this is what I go through and this is what is the stumbling block, this is how I work on it. There is a personalized look and outlook on that particular topic. So that responsibility, when it lands on us, our minds start thinking in a streamlined process. We are not experts, but there is an opportunity to reach to that platform of expertise. That we learn through it and gain that expertise. and the fifth benefit. How many ever times we read the scriptures? Like I personally have read through the book Self-Unfoldment at least 70 times so far. Until now, in the past 18 years, 20 years, I must have gone through that particular book at least 70 times. The first time I looked at that book, I thought this is pretty simple book, catered for the initial beginners. Read through the book. I thought I gained a lot. Now when I look at that book, I'm still, amazed. There is so much to offer that even after 20 years into this path, when I look into that book, it has such subtleties in it that the entire scriptural knowledge has been squeezed into that little book called Self-Unfoldment. That even somebody who has done enough research in that field still finds beauty in it, still finds that freshness in it. So the point that I am trying to indicate is that when we go through a subject, at that particular evolvement of our personality, at that point, we see only one particular angle. When such 10, 15 sincere souls are sitting together, each one looking at a different perspective, each one's perspective we have something to gain from. Each one has a separate beauty to add to that topic. And the example that I usually take is, if there is a group of 10-15 people who are artists, painters, and there is a beautiful flower vase kept in a nice illuminated platform, and you are sitting on a circle around it. Each one is given a paper and a pencil to sketch it out. Each one comes out amazing. But when you compare them, they are similar but they are not same. They are looking at the same thing, but the angle with which they are looking at it and painting is very limited. And when you put all those angles together, you get such a wide spectrum to understand what is displayed there. That is how the study group should evolve, that each one participating gains from others' interpretation, others' viewpoint in trying to understand that particular point of scripture. Do you know which is a book which has the highest number of commentaries available in the world? I didn't hear, I just... It is Bhagavad Gita. Not even the Bible. Bhagavad Gita is the highest number of commentaries. I have at least gone through 45-50 commentaries so far, thoroughly. Each one has such an amazing aspect to present. Like when you look at Gurudeva's Bhagavad Gita, the entire perspective is from the Advaita Tattva philosophy. When you look at Bal Gangadhar Tilak's Bhagavad Gita, it is such a pointed focus on karma and efficiency in karma. And that is why he calls his Bhagavad Gita as Karma Rahasya. That is the title of his book, which he wrote when he was in the prison, in the jail, with a small little pencil that was available. When you look at Paramahamsa Yogananda's commentary on Bhagavad Gita, it is such a beautiful way to learn all the etymological derivations of every single aspect of Bhagavad Gita. For just the word Arjuna, he gives 10 different meanings. For Krishna, he gives 15-20 different meanings. Dhritarashtra, he gives 5-6 different meanings. When you look at, Madhvacharya, Ramanujacharya, Madhusudana Saraswati, each one has got their own perspective. And when you look at the simplicity of Vinoba Bhave and his interpretation of Bhagavad Gita, oh wow, Bhagavad Gita can be interpreted this way? Such a beautiful way to interpret it. It is totally on service. His focus point is service there. It is not to say that the other person's perspective is wrong. It is to understand that even this perspective can be incorporated for comprehensive understanding. And when you look at the Theosophical Society, their presentation, there is so much of astrophysics and things included there. Wow, it can be interpreted in such scientific way. It has got that many different perspectives to understand. And by reading through these 40-50 different commentaries, the only standpoint that I have come so far is my understanding is infinitesimally small understanding, fragment of it. There's so much more to learn, so much more to know, so much more to apply in life. That is called growth mindset. When these 5 different benefits are thoroughly understood by us, what is the first benefit? Moving the mindsets from Jalpa to Vada to Samvada. Second? Okay, one person raising the hand and saying it at a time. Okay, Anekagrata to Ekagrata. Third?
Understand the practical application.
The theory aspect of it and the practical application of it. Fourth?
Put mind to contemplate, put it in the right direction.
To contemplate as to how these principles would work and not to contemplate as to how these principles would not work. That involves Shraddha. Fifth, to come to a growth mindset, to understand, appreciate and respect. All perspectives have something beautiful to offer. I think in a study group in its initial stages, the fifth one is of utmost priority. When somebody is trying to present their perspective, don't look at it from a ridiculous point. फिर बोल रहा है, बोलो. To have the depth to allow other persons open up and give their perspective, to identify what is the beauty in it and what is it that is going way off the mark. And before you reject it, understand why it has to be rejected logically. That is what brings it back to the topic. Now with these 5 benefits, whether somebody in study group benefits or not, tell me, as a facilitator, would you benefit or not?
Yes.
Now when you are convinced that you would get benefited out of it, and with that sincerity when you sit as a facilitator, the rest of it is a bonus. And the most painful thing is, I have been here for 9 years or 10 years now. The same question by the same person asked in every single topic or scripture that we take is pretty disheartening. If you sincerely look at it, then I have not been doing a good job at it. It takes time for people to evolve. We cannot force that evolution process on others. We can only facilitate that process. We cannot expect perfection from anybody else other than one's own self. And with this sincerity and understanding, to know that it will benefit me and sit there, that conviction convinces others that it will benefit them personally. So far clear? Any questions so far? Yes, sir.
What is the role of faith and Shraddha? How do you relate if somebody is studying fruits and is lacking somehow in the faith that this is going to benefit them? Is that something that you're born with as a conditioning aspect of Shraddha, or is it something that you learn after understanding? What is the role of faith for Shraddha?
There are two answers to it. His question is the Shraddha aspect. How do we, is it something that can be inculcated? It is something that can be inculcated after the study? Is it something that you have to start with? How do we start with? The first answer is that leave the group aside. When we start, let us start with Shraddha. Like when I am starting, I start with Shraddha myself. Now for this Shraddha to develop in me, before I could start looking into the scriptures, I must have asked some of the most ridiculous questions to Gurudev. When I look back, I only have a big smile on my face at my own foolishness as to how could I ever ask him all these questions. But he had the nourishing patience to not ridicule my standpoint, but to educate my standpoint. To a point wherein, after having heard his explanations, there were many such unanswered questions still, but I gave up investigating into them in the wrong channel. I said, if so far he has answered in the right way, maybe they will also get answered. And when that's stabilized from within, then when I started looking into the scripture, over a period, these things start getting answered. And the US mindset, the Indians who are in the US mindset, they love question answer sessions more than the actual lecture. I'm not kidding. Even in the Yuva Kendra seminars that I go around, I find that they want more of question answers than of the actual substance. But I do understand that until they reach to that standpoint wherein they say that so far it has been answered, I'm okay with the logic, the rest of it will be answered later, the actual education process would not start. So it should lead to the second point of the answer. Is Shraddha is something that has to be inculcated, can be inculcated, but the basic queries have to be answered. And once that Shraddha is established, then we will see that the scripture starts speaking to you directly. Even though you do not know Sanskrit, it reveals unto you. That subtle aspect, it will reveal unto you. I am not trying to make it any mystical or mysterious. It is directly proportional to the Shraddha that you invest in it. Which Bhagavan himself says in Bhagavad Gita, Yo yo yam yam tanum bhaktaha shraddhayarchitum ichchati. That individual with whatever little Shraddha that he invests, equivalent of it is revealed. So it is the starting point is to develop that Shraddha. And once that Shraddha is developed, and there is no looking back. There may be some intermediately dull phases, but there is no going back. It is only moving forward. There can be a pause, but not slipping back. So I hope I have answered your question. Any other questions of the benefit of study group?
Is there an ideal number for the group?
As I said, the ideal number for the first pattern of study group is where everybody prepares and they present is 10. But knowing the structure in Chinmaya Mission Dallas right now, that is not possible. So the next structure wherein there can be 20 to the max of 25 people in a group, wherein 2 are assigned per term or per week. They come prepare and they present the topic and the rest of them have their queries answered. In that pattern, I think maximum that you can go with is 20 to 25, not beyond.
Is it possible to have study groups based on level of evolution with Vedantic literature? Because what happens is some people have read so many texts and they actually have some concepts in place. There are others who have not even read the English books that are part of the Chinmaya literature. And so it becomes very difficult in the study group to have a good discussion because you refer to something, there are people who don't even know what you're talking about. And it doesn't work very well unless there are people at the, sort of at the same level. Not that everyone is at the same level, but at least people who have been reading, say, for 20 years and can cope and can refer. And then others who are very new and are doing this for the first time.
Okay. Her question is that can we have these study groups based on the level of introduction to Vedantic studies? I do see the point because when see there were around 9 or 10 of us in Hyderabad who are in Yuva Kendra who have become Swamis now, Brahmacharis and Swamis. So when we sit together, we have a ball of time because the level of discussion, we don't need to start from the basics and there is not much of fluff, there is directly stuff that we speak. And when we refer to certain things, whether it is Upanishads or Brahma Sutras or any Shankara Bhashya, we know exactly as to what who is referring to and what they are trying to interpret out of it. And it is a very satisfying feeling when you go through that. But when I come back to a lecture session wherein I get a cross section of anybody who is just introduced to Chinmaya Mission to somebody who has been a life member of Chinmaya Mission. There are two kinds of membership. One is a file membership, the other one is life membership. There are some who are there only in the files. There are some who really take it to their heart and start applying it too. And when you have that kind of a cross section, wherein I got a recent email saying that he attended one of the sessions which was a very small group and I knew everybody as to what were their backgrounds in introduction into Vedanta, and my lecture took off in a different standpoint. So he said, can your Sunday lectures be of this standard? So I said, with the existing standard, I find at least 4 to 5 people on their snooze mode. If I go off in this standard, I'll have 50-60 people on the snooze mode. See, even today when I started off this topic, not knowing as to who would be from what background, when I introduced Samhita, the word, there were certain eyes that were like, what? What is Samhita? So I had to go back to the topic of saying that these are the 4 Vedas, then there are these segments and there are these 4 parts of in each segment, and the last part, I had to introduce it. So it becomes the role of the facilitator here to go down to that basics and then bring it back to that level effectively. So I don't look at it as a painful process, but it is something that is unavoidable. Yes, sir.
In third session, we were given the option to discuss the Bhagavad Gita and self-improvement. The majority took that to discuss the Bhagavad Gita in the class. The group wanted to go for a improvement of Bhagavad Gita in the class because last year we started it, but we never
Completed it. I will be more than happy if you shift back to self-unfoldment.
because that is more like practice.
If the entire group feels so. If the entire group feels so, then you can go back to the study group with self-unfoldment.
There we had more participation last year and this year we don't see much participation.
Fair enough. So you can shift back. Okay.
For us, studying is really when we're talking about the teacher.
Now for everybody here, study group is new.
And so we've not yet been given any one medium, like book or a certain series of lectures to talk about in study group. So our pattern usually has been very erratic. We usually take what you've been talking, in your shlokas that you go through, we take that and start to dissect it, give our personal opinion. So is your recommendation that as a facilitator we choose something? Because then we can apply the structure, because otherwise.
The study groups were started here with self-unfoldment, but the study groups there started off with Bhagavad Gita. So I would say there you continue with Bhagavad Gita. Because there is a little feeling of not completing that topic. So the option they are given is complete that topic.
And so as a facilitator, I feel like what she was saying, I'm not one of those individuals who have been immersed in any kind of education around this. It's all probably just because of the evolution of Shraddha that's coming there. So I want to understand as a facilitator, what can I do to either work with you, or are there series of books, are there series of lectures that will benefit me so that at least I can guide? Because sometimes I feel I can be a good facilitator and listener, but my knowledge is not at par where I can take it into a direction I would like to take it. I
Good.
don't know if I can take it to that direction or not.
Good. And that leads me to the next point of how to conduct the study groups. First, let me tell you the basics of the structure of study group. You have half an hour max. Half an hour actually is not a very effective time. I understand that. So let me have a disclaimer right in the beginning. An ideal time would be 1 hour, and we started off last year with that 1 hour in mind, but there were so many so many phone calls and emails that had to be answered, personal, that we had to shift back to the existing pattern of 1.5 hours where we get only half an hour for study groups. But in that half an hour of study group, when you gather into a group, start off with 3 Oms and Sahana Bhavatu. Each facilitator has at least 15 to 20 in their group. You should have a roster for yourself to have all the members that are included in your group. Gather their email IDs, gather their phone numbers, and keep them in a group loop where you create an email group or whatever that you create. Keep them in a loop wherein everybody is in an open communication. In this way, I have an ulterior motive also. As much as we look for the students' attendance in the classrooms, we don't have anything that can regulate the parents' participation and their attendance. this will be one of the easy ways to track the parents. And those parents who are just drop off and leave parents can be easily tracked. And you as a facilitators, I think I can extend my responsibility to you in nudging them to participate. I won't say force them, but at least keep them in the loop so that they will understand that this is something that people are caring for them and they would appreciate their presence. Because for most of the parents, the mindset is, there are two mindsets. One, I'm talking about those parents who are not participating. One mindset is, I don't need to learn anything. I know it all. It is my children who have to learn. This is one mindset that you will find prevalent. The other mindset is of little more sincere people, but their Shraddha is not that effective yet. And what is their Shraddha at? That I cannot change. Let at least children benefit. What is point in an effort wherein I know that I cannot change because I'm like this only? At least let the children benefit. Both these mindsets have to be pulled in back into the group. Once the group forms that bonding, what I have found is that you start finding new relations and new friendships, which is quite vital, especially in an environment that we are living in US. To find some group that you can rely on, to find a network that you can relax your shoulders around is very difficult to form. This would take into a social realm too. It would have that effect. That in the older study groups that I have seen in like Chicago or Houston and other places, when this particular group of 15-20 people, now they have the outside functions and social gatherings. These 15 are the core group there. That when they move out of Chinmaya Mission, that friendship is what continues. And that bonding is something that's very natural in India. Though we talk about India in a very cheap manner, that people are very nosy. They keep bothering you with all details and try to snoop around with your personal things, keep bothering you with what you have to do, what you have to not do. But if you understand on the flip side, this is the same group that stands by you in times of needs. That group is totally absent at this moment for the individual families, the nucleus families here in the US. This network helps that build around you in this country. So this helps even there. So you will have to invite them, keep inviting them, keep nudging them to come back. So you maintain that roster, and the roster also helps in assigning 2 people per session who can take charge of the shloka or the segment of self-unfoldment that you have to address the next week. So you give them that this will be the segment, page number this to page number this, shloka number this to shloka number this, that you have to cover. They come back prepared. And when they come back prepared, you can, as you said personally, that you will have to have your own reference books to understand and better yourself. For self-unfoldment, let me give you the reference books first. If you are doing self-unfoldment, first book is definitely self-unfoldment, read it thoroughly. Own a copy and read it thoroughly. The second book make sure that the others don't show it. The second book that you could refer to is the first 80 odd pages of Kenopanishad. Sorry, not Kenopanishad, Ishavasyopanishad. Sorry. This Ishavasyopanishad was a lecture series for 41 days, and the first 80 odd pages is amazing introduction into self-unfoldment. It's a very good reference. Ishavasyopanishad's first, this is all commentary by Gurudev. Then there is the set of volumes called Vedanta, the Science of Life. It comes in 3 volumes. Vedanta, the Science of Life. Very beautifully capturing the entire spectrum of Vedantic studies in these 3 books. The third book that I would refer usually is Kindle Life. Fourth book is called Art of Man Making. How many books have I referred to so far? 4. Fifth book would be a small booklet called Tune in the Mind. The 6th book would be Art of Contemplation. The 7th book would be Meditation and Life. Now once you go through these 7 books, I think you will have a firm footing in various aspects of the subject that we are handling. Now coming to Bhagavad Gita. These 7 books are a must for any person to have a firm footing. Plus, there is Gita for children. And the title should not throw you off. Hum bacche nahi hai, we are not kids. But understand that Bhagavad Gita has been explained in the most simplistic terms, so it will be easy for you. There is a book called Gita, the reference book. You were saying something, Sambhuji? Yeah, I'm coming to that. Then I would include another book called Every Breath a Teaching. These are practical examples of how Vedanta can be applied in life. There is 2 set of volumes, book which is with 2 sets. It is called Vedanta Through Letters, Part 1 and Part 2. And the third one is I Love You Letters. I Love You Letters. Letters by Gurudev to the kids. It was one of the syllabuses when I had come earlier in 2002 in the Balavihar. But that book is such deep, I don't think the kids would do justice to it. So I had it removed, but that is an amazing book to study. I think with these 4 added in for Bhagavad Gita, it will add a lot of firm footing for you in facilitating. So once you have these rosters and you have these 2 people assigned and you give them these reference books that they have to prepare from, there is enough on our website that they can listen to the audio. The audio in every session is recorded and posted, so they can refer to it for their quick preparation. They come, they take around 10 minutes each to do their part. There are 2 people chosen and each person takes 10 minutes, not more, and they stick to those 10 minutes, they present what they have to present. The second person also presents what they have to present. The rest of them in the group jot down what are the things that they don't agree with what they have been presenting, and ask questions. And that person who it is questioned has to have the preparedness to answer those queries. If not ready, they at least would have to be ready to prepare for it, know it, come back and answer to those people. So this would take at least 5-10 minutes. And if there is somebody else who has an opinion to offer, at the end they can offer. As a facilitator, you have to round the entire thought for that day and put it in a crisp 2 to 3 lines that this is what we have learnt today. As they would say here, take home message. That in today's discussion, this is what we learnt. This could be the practical application. Please try, observe it. As a homework, that when you go home, that this is what you have to try, watch, apply in your life. And then at the end, you finish it with Purnamadaha and conclude. There is a daily group that I conduct on Tuesdays or Thursdays from 10:30 to 12 here in Saket. The pattern that I follow is, we have already seen through what Panchakam is it? Sadhana Panchakam. So we have already seen through Sadhana Panchakam, now we are doing Atma Bodha. There are at least 20 people in that group, so we have every week 2 people assigned, and I have also a person assigned who will take care of coordinating, sending emails and other things to these people. They come prepared for that week, 10 minutes each they present, and the 10 minutes later they ask questions, they clarify, and at the end of this discussion I try to bring in a complete picture of what was discussed and conclude. This takes around 1 hour. Then the later half an hour I have introduced them to learning Lalita Sahasranam. So over a period, once they learn this Lalita Sahasranama on Fridays, open up the chanting followed by the meaning on Lalita Sahasranama on Fridays. So that is a later plan. When you have that 1.5 hour time, you could squeeze in the chanting portion to learn. You could have 1 or 2 bhajans. So it feels little comprehensive. Half an hour you can only do so much. So in your sessions, if you feel that there are many of you who would have time on weekdays, on the afternoons, we could start. I still have 5 more days to fill in, no 4 more days to fill in on the afternoons. So if you think that it is something effective that we could start, you can think about it too, to start a group of people on the afternoons. Yes, every Thursday we have 3 more study groups, one which is conducted here in Saket, which I would call the veterans of Chinmaya Mission, all those strong pillars of Chinmaya Mission who have been here in Chinmaya Mission for almost 20-25 years. So they have a group here. Then there is one conducted by Sushma Dandekar at her house. Oh, at Rachna's house. Okay, because they have been shifting into too many places. So then there is a third one which is conducted by Sambhuji at his home. What is the topic that you are going through now? Narad Bhakti Sutras. So these are the various study groups that we have. Nanaga, what are you doing here in the study group? Upadesh Saram. And there is self-unfoldment in Sushma Dambekar's study group. So these are the 4 study groups that we have other than the Balavihar time, which is a solid 1.5 hour period. Now I think with this kind of reference books and the structure that we can follow, there is some streamlining that can happen in our study groups, and there is a structure to it rather than this haywire system. Now do you have any questions with regards to how to conduct study groups? Yes, sir.
I noticed something very probably this is common across people who are assigned to study don't come to the next session or don't come prepared for it. And second, they may not come with a book. It's completely. Then we end up having a study group session that we have to inform to improvise on the spot because the property is not taken. What do you recommend to change that?
You can have extra books. You can have extra books and you can share it.
Like I have it in most of the Vedantic lectures that when I don't find somebody having a book, I send them to the bookstore. You may have it at home, buy one, come. But I know that is my power of yellow. That is not something that can be forced. I don't have a quick fix solution for it, because as he started asking, is Shraddha something that can be, conditioned or brought in? Shraddha is not something that can be pushed. It has to evolve. So I would say that as a facilitator, you be prepared to pitch in those absentees. But make sure that when they come in, you mention it in the group that, hey, you missed it, I pitched in, but please be regular.
So I have a suggestion for that. Something you're talking about before, it's called the power of the boss. You can come up with a way of having a meeting, that you start your week not done yet. You start calling Swamiji and there and you can say this person did not come prepared. You might see a quick increase when they realize Swamiji might respond to that saying, next time you might see that could happen. That's what you have to do. First try, ask to get work done. Second try, copy their boss. Usually work gets done.
Try. I'll have an excessive of 35-40 emails, but it's okay. I would say that have patience and you pitch in and mention it to them in the group that, hey, you missed it, please don't miss it henceforth.
But if it happens again?
Try it again. That's why it takes at least a year and a half to settle in this structure. And until then you have to have that patience. And as a facilitator, you have to be prepared to pitch in. That's why when we come out of the Vedanta course as brahmacharis, we come as a comprehensive package. We are good electricians, we are good carpenters, we are good plumbers, we are good property managers, we are good organizers, administrators. Because wherever there is a volunteer that is absent, we have to pitch in there. So we end up learning that task. So as a facilitator, that is the same thing that I can extend. Yeah, I'll just finish it in 5 minutes. Yes.
I just wanted to say that some of these reference books are available in CD format. The Gurudev talks.
Right.
I don't know. I found many of this in India. Of the
No, they are available on chinnapublications.org. All these, most of it, like Art of Living, is there on CDs. Then there is, I think, not the book that I am referring to. There is a later version of Ishavasya Upanishad which is by Gurudev, but the original 141 days lecture was not recorded. That 80 pages is something that one has to go through to be wowed. At the end of that 80 pages, you will have that wow moment.
Vedanta, the Science of Life, that book is not available online, Chinna Publications website, is another place we can get it.
After I close the mic, I'll tell you a secret. I don't want it to go on record. Okay, I wish you all the best for the facilitating process. Hopefully with this structure we will have a better way of reaching out to our congregation. And this is not something that I am trying to enforce, though people don't like it, is because something that I am convinced that it will benefit over a period of time. And as much as I am trying to have patience, please continue with patience with these people, and hopefully they will find the change and they will like it sooner than expected. Om Purnamadaha Purnamidam Purnat Purnamudachyate Purnasya Purnamadaya Purnamevavasishyate. Om Shant Shant Shanti. Harihi Om Shri Gurubhyo Namaha. Harihi Om.